We're basically going to open this up to the lives of the saints. I mean, we admire the saints. You know, they lived, very, very magnificent lives. But one of the things that we need to remember about the saints, they were all different. They were all tremendously, almost radically different. But they heard the voice of God. And so we're going to break that open in terms of the lives of the saints. I'm going to try to wrap it up today. I want to end with a very fascinating case study that brings this alive in the life of a particular person named Jerry. And so I want to end it with a case study. It'll concretize or give a sense of the experience of a person hearing the voice of God after a very arduous spiritual journey. I'm going to conclude with that. So anyway, the first thing I'm going to do is read from the book of Acts. And it's about a person we're all familiar with, but is an enigma person, a saint. And that's the absolutely mystifying life of St. Paul. Okay. In the book of Acts, in chapter 9, something happened to him. Something very profound happened to him that radically changed his life and the direction he was taking. And this is how it goes. Chapter 9. Now Saul, still breathing murderous threats against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, that if he should find any men or women who belonged to the way, he might bring them back to Jerusalem in chains. On his journey, as he was nearing Damascus, a light from the sky suddenly flashed around him. He fell to the ground, and he heard a voice. He heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" He said, "Who are you, sir?" The reply came, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." The men who were traveling with him stood speechless, for they heard the voice, but could see no one. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him to Damascus. For 3 days he was unable to see, and he neither ate nor drank. Now that is in the realm of mystery, but it happens to people in different ways, as we're going to see as we break this open into the lives of the saints. And as a kind of an introduction to getting into that, the one thing that we as a people of faith seek is just one thing, really. We seek heaven. I mean, that's what we're seeking, right? I mean, we're seeking heaven. And we play with things. We play with different ideas. We play with different opinions. We listen to the news. We know what's going on here and there. And we have all these discussions and all these ideologies and so on and so forth. And so we're seeking, people of faith are seeking heaven in the midst of all this, turmoil and so on and so forth. It's so absolutely, I guess it's so intense in our society today that we really try to understand what is really happening to people. What is going on in the lives of people? And so this is the conflict that goes on. This happened in the lives of the saints. It's important for us to understand this. There's so much that can lead us downward. We know that. Okay. We've gotten this far in life. But when we think about our lives, or the lives of anybody, lives that we know, our friends, our family members, we know that there's a lot around them that can lead them down. That's the way the world is. It's the way the devil operates. And so there is this force or this tendency or these influences that are determined to bring us away from our eternal destiny. And sometimes it's even in subtle ways. It's again this whole thing about the concept, almost comical, of the angel on our right shoulder and the devil on our left shoulder. We often see this in cartoons. I remember seeing as a little kid cartoons, and out of some cartoon there's an angel on one side and there's a devil on the other, Okay, so really we can characterize it this way. And this is not only just this day and age, it's any day and age, is that people who are suspended between heaven and hell. Suspended between heaven and hell. If you think about every single person in between, in that whole sense of the struggle of their lives, no matter what it may be, there's that sense of being suspended between heaven and hell. Jonathan Edwards, a Protestant minister, once gave this sermon that actually is part of literature now. It's the soul of man in the hands of God, and he portrays it as, God has his almighty hand up here, and the person is like a little spider on the end of a very thin thread, and there's heaven up there and there's hell down there, and that little spider is right in between. And God's trying to draw that little spider up into heaven, trying his best, but the flames are enraging below. And there's that thin little line that's keeping that person between heaven and hell. It's really a magnificent sermon, And believe it or not, this was part of our English class in high school. I remember that. It's so vivid. You don't forget that, And so anyway, when we look at it that way, we can say that, in a sense, being suspended between heaven and hell is purgatory. So life, for many of us, for anybody really, is kind of a purgatory too. We need to be purified. We need to be enriched. We need to learn. We need to pray. We need to practice the faith. And so this whole sense of, purgatory being after death, yes, is something that we believe as Catholics, yes. But life is purgatorial too. And so we take that into account in our personal conversion and our listening to the voice of God. Okay? And so the one thing that's problematic today, and we see this so very clearly, is the divided heart. The divided heart. Okay? Trying to serve two masters. Okay? We see this encompassed in Catholic politicians. Okay? I guess we could characterize or say, like Nancy Pelosi or Joe Biden, or however you want to view this, is that really, for them, there might be this tremendous conflict of having a divided heart. They have two loyalties. And this is not just them. This is for a lot of Catholics. A lot of Catholics have a divided heart. A lot of Christians have a divided heart. A lot of denominations have a divided heart. Which means they're in between. There's this tendency to serve two masters. They want to serve the Lord Jesus because of their faith, but they also, in a sense, want to serve the world in a way that's demanded of them. The world kind of demands that we serve the world in some way. And that's what we're facing as a supposedly Judeo-Christian society. And so this is, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is because this is what the saints struggled with in the different ages, especially when we're studying the Reformation, all about divided hearts, the whole sense of the tremendous battle that goes on between heaven and hell, with purgatory percolating in between. And so the thing is, a lot of people, in terms of the divided heart, we need to recognize that progress in the spiritual life can be slow and painful. It can be slow and painful. Okay. Wasn't it that way for Jesus? His life got to a point where it was slow and painful. Okay. And so the thing is as being imitators of Christ in our Christian commitment to Jesus, we know that our progress is in many ways going to be somewhat slow, and painful at times. Okay, but that's part of carrying your cross and following me, is what Jesus said. So it's very clear to us. And then we get into the category of neurosis. When a person has, the psychological thing is pretty interesting because it's like, psychosis and neurosis, okay? The thing, of course, that it used to be, portrayed in this way, if you're neurotic, you're not psychotic. But if you're psychotic, you don't know you're psychotic, but you're also neurotic also. So it's just this kind of funny ways of describing these things. But when we think about anxiety, we think about fears, think about phobias, all these things that plague human beings in the psychological realm, is this whole sense of what psychologists call the neurosis. So you go to therapy, you talk about why you're fearing this, and of course it's good to be able to talk to somebody, about what's going on in you, what's going on in the deepest aspect of yourself, and so as we go on with a better understanding of this, is that a lot of people, and all of us in some way or another, have neurotic tendencies, which means we have our failings, our weaknesses, our personal weaknesses that we need to deal with. And under certain confidential circumstances, we will talk about those fears with someone we trust. Okay? This is the whole purpose of spiritual direction. When a person goes to spiritual direction, it's the whole purpose of a person going to a counselor. Okay? Because you're dealing with weakness, being fragile as human beings. Okay? Because we all want to be portrayed as strong. Right? Macho man. I've got to be a macho man. We all want to be strong. Okay? So the thing is, and of course, men and women, we want to be strong. We want to present to the world an image of competence, success. And the world demands that of us, The world has very little patience with people who are weak, And so this is what every human being struggles with this, okay? So there's neurotic tendencies, okay? And then there's the thing of settling for less. I'll settle for less. I'm tired of fighting. I'm going to settle for less, okay? To settle for what is less than God. Settling for what's less than God when He has called us. When God calls us, He calls us to a higher order. Okay, we all know this, okay? We all have some vocation. We all have some sense of serving God in some way, even in a small way. We all have that call, okay? And that's why we're here today. And so, but for a lot of people, and a lot of people will settle for an ideology, and that almost becomes their religion in place of God. It's an ideology. It's a system of belief. It's a political party. It's a political viewpoint. It's an opinion. It's whatever, okay? And so the thing is then the question becomes is this God's will? What is God asking me to do? Or am I settling for something less because I can't deal with God anymore? And some people will even say, God doesn't work for me anymore. I don't know what He wants. So what do? They gravitate for something else to believe in. And so anyway, so now, there is an old Irish adage, and this is, applies to the saints very specifically, but us also. The higher we climb, the higher the devil climbs. That is so true. Of course, the Irish are pretty wise people, right? So this whole thing about this adage is the higher we climb, the more power a person gets in their life, whatever it may be, financial power, political power, religious influence. It could be anybody, any place, any time, any vocation, any line of work. When that person gets higher up in the ways of the world, gets higher up in authority, responsibility, the devil is climbing with them to that same height. And that's the danger of being important. That's the danger of being somebody. You take a look at the saints. Most of them, a good number of them, I guess, they were nobodies. Absolutely nobodies. And all the somebodies were up here, and the somebodies didn't have a clue as to what God's will was. So here comes along this nobody that knows God's will. Isn't that kind of weird? It's kind of strange. Jesus was a nobody. in a sense. You look at it that way. And all of a sudden, buddies couldn't stand his guts. They wanted to crucify him. You know? Okay, so now, here we go. Sigmund Freud. There's a lot of opinions about Sigmund Freud. But let's give the guy a little bit of credit, okay? Because he did make some discoveries that were significant. And he is still characterized as the founder of the science of psychology, okay? Gotta give him credit for that. He was a little neurotic. You know, he had his own things that he was struggling with, okay? And so, but he said this, and it's so true. Under the emotions is anxiety. A deep fear of meaninglessness and oblivion, which goes right to the core. That is so true. He saw this. This was an insight that he had. I'll repeat that again. Under the emotions is anxiety, a deep fear of meaninglessness and oblivion, which goes right to the core. People ask themselves, does my life have meaning? Does it make a difference anywhere? Does anybody really care about me? Does anybody really love me? Does anybody care whether I live or die? People struggle with this. It's a deep-seated anxiety and oblivion. When you think about dying, it's a pretty frightening thing, because there's no greater fear than being nothing, ever and eternally nothing, oblivion. It wouldn't have made any difference whether I was here or not. That's a deep-seated fear that human beings in our fallenness have to face. Every single human being. And so, now, here we go. Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve. Oh, poor Adam and Eve. They blew it. We know it. They blew it. Okay. Now, Adam and Eve. Picture this. It's an image. Okay, so picture this. Standing in terror before the gates of lost paradise. Oh my God. What kind of a feeling that must have been. Oh no. We blew it. There's paradise. That was our home. We had everything. Now we have nothing. That was sheer, absolute, almost unbearable terror. Lost paradise. And it got even worse because longing for forgotten peace. There was no longer peace in their life. There was struggle, conflict. They were out there in the world. And they had to deal with that. Think about that. That's really the human condition. Summarized. Fearing what life might bring in the future. When they were in paradise, they had a beautiful future. They didn't have that anymore. So they looked to the future, and they were filled with fear and anxiety. That's the fallen nature of humanity in a nutshell. And that's what we all face as human beings. Okay, here we go. The spiritual life. How does the spiritual life fit into this? And how do the saints tell us something about the spiritual life? What do we learn from them in hearing or listening to the voice of God? Okay, first of all, moral integration. When we're little kids, our parents teach us the difference between right and wrong. Okay, we all know that, because we turned out to be pretty decent human beings, do we not? So our parents must our parents must have done a pretty good job, right? Our parents must have done a pretty good job. Okay, so really the first stages of life really are pretty much about moral integration, okay? Morally integrated, and of course it's encompassed in faith, loving of God and neighbor. I mean, that's like moral integration, in one aspect, okay? And so basically, what do we work against in our fallen nature, okay, when we're trying to be morally integrated? It's simply this: rebellion and self-seeking. Did you ever see a rebellious child? A child that's rebellious. Little kids, dumping up and down, screaming, yelling. You're down there pounding, they're kicking their feet, they're screaming and yelling, I hate you, I hate your guts. Little kids just totally out of control, man. They're like super angry. Okay, and a lot of parents will just let them go on until they get tired. It's like, oh no, I'm so tired. That's the end of that. Rebellion and self-seeking. Hey, look, with the kids, let's face it, this is true of all of us. At one point in life, it's all about me. It's all about me, okay? Kids, that's the way kids are. You've got to be educated, morally integrated, okay? But there are many adults, okay? And I remember somebody told me this, that somebody who's like 40 years old, but basically is at a developmental stage of being 16. They never really got, you know what I'm saying? And they may be successful people, but they're emotionally and even morally, they're like at 16 years of age, okay? That's just an example. And so the thing is that when you think about that, the whole about self-seeking, in some way or another, we all have to deal with that sense of self-seeking, It's a big question that a lot of people ask in the world, in worldly ways. Hey, look, what's in it for me? You want me to do all this? Well, that's all well and good for you, but what about me? Everybody wants a piece of the pie. That's the way the world operates, okay? And I'm not even saying that's necessarily bad, but it can turn into being bad, okay? When everybody else is like being persecuted and oppressed so that you can advance, and get what you want. Oh, I didn't get what they want. That's too bad, and I got what I want. I'm out of here, that kind of an attitude. Okay, so basically the struggle, okay, in terms of rebellion and self-seeking, which the saints had to deal with. St. Augustine had to deal with this. He's like one of the saints we'll go into, that basically struggle with this whole thing, like he said, he said, Lord, I want to come to you. Lord, I love you. I care about you. I want to do your will, but not yet. It's like, what was he dealing with, And so basically, it was the whole sense of the struggle between pain and pleasure. How much pain are you going to experience in life? How much pleasure are you going to experience in life? Are you going to choose one or the other? And what are the reasons why you're going to choose one over the other? Pain and pleasure, virtue and sin. The virtuous person, the sinful person. Sometimes we've got like a split that way. Sometimes we're virtuous, sometimes we're sinful. Hey, nobody's perfect, right? There's a lot of rationalizations we use in terms of these conflicts that we have within ourselves. Belief and unbelief, okay? Well, you're pretty strong in your faith on Monday. By the end of the week, you're not so strong in your faith anymore, So it's our belief or our faith is challenged. Sometimes every single day. Maybe not every single day, but as things happen in life, we ask ourselves the question, am I going to continue to believe it after what happened to me? Am I going to continue to believe after what happened to my loved one? Is God really loving and caring? People struggle with this, And so this is the mission of the church, is to minister to those struggles. Okay. Now, okay. And so what does a person need to do when there's conflict? In the middle of conflict, all the intensity of the emotions, all the thoughts, and all the feelings, there needs to be an awakening. Awake from the conflict. And this is the saints. The saints, in their own way, awoke from the conflict because they heard the voice of God. Well, awoke. Yeah, awoke. I know that's got so many connotations to be woke. But anyway.
5 minutes.
Okay, so what do we do? With the accommodation to the absolute. We have to accommodate ourselves to what God is asking us to do, because we're going to have to give up some things. It's all in the arena of sacrifice. What are we going to sacrifice if we're going to be a Christian? That's a tough question. What do we call that? What do we call that in the Catholic Church? Growth in holiness. Growth in holiness. Okay, now, it looks like there's a lot more. Sorry about that. But anyway, now I'm just going to introduce this. This is where I'm getting specifically into the lives of the saints, okay? And so basically what we do here, the four voices of God. In terms of our development, every single person, okay, in terms of listening to the voice of God, there's three major aspects to ourselves that we need to pay attention to. And this is what the saints had to pay attention to. Classical, spiritual, psychological. Let me break that open. Okay. Classical. Everything that we ever learned about anything. Classical education. Okay, what's a classical education? Most of us have had what we call a classical education because we're at the age where, education at one time was like pretty much stable, right? Now it's like, who knows what goes on in schools now. But I think the thing classical, all the crap you learned in high school, okay, even that counts in this, okay? The good and the bad. Classical, spiritual. What do you know about spirituality? What do you know about the teachings of the church? What do you know about the saints? What do you know about your prayer life? How often do you pray every day? You pray once a day, twice a day, morning prayer, night prayer. What do? You go to church? Okay, you pay attention to, your soul, that kind of thing, spiritual. And then psychological. What's your psychological makeup? We went into that a little bit, in terms of the four voices of God, and the different personality types. Because personality typing gives us insights not only into how we hear the voice of God, but how we interact as human beings and helping each other. Well, we have a strength in one area, but not a strength in another area. But the other person has a strength in the area that we're not strong in. So if you get all people together that are listening to the four voices of God, what do you got? You got a church. You got a church. You got a Christian church around Jesus Christ. Okay? And so that's the thing. Okay, so now there was this philosopher by the name of von Hugel, some philosophy guy. Von Hugel, he said this: the mystery of the spiritual life is ultimately seen as unity in unimaginable diversity. So God brings things out of chaos when we listen to the voices of God. The church is struggling. Okay? But when you think about all the personalities of people in the church, all the personalities of all the saints that ever lived, the saints that are even living now, okay, that unity is miraculous. Why does the church still exist today when there were like 1,000 different things, 1,000 different people and ideologies and beliefs to try to destroy the church? It still exists, that unity. But it was a unity in unimaginable diversity, the sense that the church still hangs together. It's just like one of the things before Vatican II, it's still applicable today, is that the church is like a ship on a stormy sea. There's so much that wants to sink that ship. So many storms that want to just overwhelm it and just sink it to the bottom of the sea. But that church keeps struggling through that storm, looking for the calm. That's a good way to look at the church in this day and age, but in every day and age. Okay, now, this is the ultimate question. What must we do to gain the happiness of heaven? What a question that is. What do you want me to do, Lord? How can I get to heaven? We're all kind of looking for that, right? It's just this one question, which has a lot of validity to it. Between Protestants and Catholics, if you were going to die, if you die tonight, are you going to go to heaven? Because a lot of the saved Christians say, "Yeah, man, I'm going to go to heaven." Hey, guys, no, I know for sure, I'm guaranteed, I'm going to heaven. I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. He's my Savior. I've given myself over to Him, and I die. I know I'm going to heaven. What do Catholics say? Oh, well, I may spend some time in purgatory, And so the thing is like they're saying, and then the question becomes, where's the saying in the Bible about purgatory? Well, you just may be living it here on earth, doing your time here. And so the thing is that when you think about that, there's a sense of validity to both ways to look at it. But when you think about purgatory, this is going to become clear when I do the case study. The case study is going to shed some light on what is purgatorial. Why does Catholics believe in purgatory? Okay, so let me get it. What must we do to gain the happiness of heaven? To gain, this is interesting, and I know some of you are going to know what I'm going to say right now. Okay? Some of you are going to remember this. We're all old enough, I think, to remember this. It goes like this. What must we do to gain the happiness of heaven? To gain the happiness of heaven, we must know, love, and serve God in this world and be happy with Him forever in the next. Heck, I learned that in first grade. Wasn't that one of the questions in Baltimore Catechism? Just thank God for that. Little Baltimore Catechism, there's sisters up there. All right, stand up in a row. Okay, let's memorize this now, boys and girls, And so the thing is, to gain the happiness, we must know, love, and serve God in this world in order to be happy with Him forever and the next. Okay, so now, all right, now, God as one true, good, and beautiful. Next time, if there is a next time, I don't know.
There's going to be a next time.
Is that we're going to start with God is one, and the saint that we're going to deal with is precious St. Catherine of Genoa, who a lot of people don't know very much about. And then each one will go to each saint in that category, and it'll open up to us the whole sense of their struggle, and we can relate to it in many different ways. And then I'll end with the case study that brings it all together.
You want 5 minutes of Q&A, Padre?
Yeah, let's do it.
Questions?
Yeah. We didn't use the word purpose, but when somebody does lose their purpose in life, what are some of the tools? I'm thinking about the invalid, the one that's stuck in bed, and I'm just laying here, the days are getting worse, they're getting darker in their mind, etc. How do we serve someone like that?
How do we serve them? All right. It's interesting. I had a 2-hour conversation with a friend of mine in California about that exact same thing, that topic. It's amazing you bring that up. Okay. This is the way to approach this, okay? And I've had to deal with this over at Ave Maria, is that when a person comes to a point in their life where they're facing the crisis of limits, okay, the crisis of limits, being debilitated, not being able to even walk, maybe not being able to see good anymore, okay? They've lived a good life, productive life, good job, or whatever, practiced the faith or whatever. And this also applies to people who are retiring from work, in retirement. Okay? And I know, a lot of people struggle with, if they've been in a job for a long time and then they got to retire. That's a crisis of limits, because they're no longer going to be so-called important to the company or their work. This is the way that we characterize it in Catholicism. This is the best way. It's purely, specifically Catholic. When a person gets to that point, the best way, the image to use of that is that you enter the monastery. You enter the monastery, which means that the one thing you can still do, if you believe in it, is pray. You become a contemplative. Really? And I'll tell you the reason why I know this. Many years ago, a priest gave a retreat. It might have even been 7 or so long ago. And talking about being priests, okay, diocesan, or being an active priest, diocesan specifically, or, or missionary group or whatever. He said, boys, he said, there's going to be a day when you're going to have to retire from ministry, for a number of different reasons. And that's difficult for a priest, because the priest has been parishes, been active, all of a sudden they're in retirement. What the hell are they going to do? But this is not only true of that kind of vocation, but it's somebody who's worked, ardently for a company for so many years, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, then you retire. You're done. Your work is done here. Here's a nice pension, See you later. Have a nice life. What's left of it. Kind of thing. The idea of becoming contemplative, you enter into the monastery. And so what can you do? You pray. And so I think in terms of us understanding that, and dealing with people who are debilitated, first of all, you pray with them. First of all, you listen to them. You give them whatever opportunities that are still left where they can be together in the community or church. Okay. Like every Mass over here at Ave Maria, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday at 11 o'clock. And because of the pandemic, we don't have a bunch of people coming in like we used to. We got this community of people. Okay. And they're all kinds of being debilitated in all different ways, all kinds of struggles and end of life. But that's the thing. They're contemplative. They're praying. They're doing God's will. The prayers of the faithful, what do we pray for? Every time we do a rosary over there, but we go around the room before we start the rosary, we say, so-and-so, what do you want to pray for? And they mention what they want to pray for. So then we know that every person there has become a contemplative. And that they're praying for someone or something. We do that with Divine Mercy. Matter of fact, we record it. Before we start Divine Mercy, we go to each person. There's a journal. We keep a journal. And every time we put in the journal entries, and we specifically write down what each person prayed for at that Divine Mercy. Yeah. So I think the thing is, see, that's the unique thing about Ave Maria. I mean, it's a blessing to be there, is that it's spiritually based. It's Catholic based. And so those people over there, that's a monastery over there. That's exactly what that is, It's in a Catholic understanding, yes, but even for the non-Catholics, they're receiving the aura or the sense of the grace of God, and the Blessed Mother, in all of her gentleness, is taking care of those people over there. I've sensed it, And so in that regard, I think that's one way to answer that question, is that,
Okay, every case is different, as we know.
Right.
How about this? My dad was a very dedicated Catholic during all his lifetime. I think he was a pretty bright guy, and at the end of his lifetime, he lost the whole dimension. You couldn't talk to him about God anymore. So let's pray together. Let's go to church together. What he loved to do before that. So I prayed enough in my life. I don't need this anymore.
Yeah. That's not unique. Because I've seen that happen in people's lives. Now that's an enigma. There's really no adequate answer to that. But I know that some people that I've dealt with, some people that I've come to know, some of them are friends of mine. I had a funeral this past Friday for a friend of mine that left the priesthood, that no longer practiced the faith. That was the most, because I can't really go into it in any detail at this time, but it was a profound experience, because this person living in the home where he was living, the towers, the Plow Towers, is that the two sisters came from Boston. And I walked into that situation. There was nothing planned. Nothing. And so the thing was, I had to act pretty quickly. The two sisters said to me, Father, will you say something? It was by the grace of the Holy Spirit that whatever I said, it resonated. That room was filled with people. That man, in some mystical, strange way, even though he was alienated from the church and from the priesthood for many years, touched the lives in some way of all those people. They loved him. And that opened my eyes to the fact that whatever your father was going through could be, in a sense, as I interpret it with some people, could be looked at this way, because we still pray for them, obviously. A kind of a mystical sort of sense of a profound acceptance of everything. And it's kind of like saying, I'm ready to go. There's nothing more I can do. I am ready to go. There's nothing more I can do. There's nothing more I want to do or care to do. I'm just plain downright ready. And that brings into fruition everything that came before in his life and everything that came before in the life of this friend of mine. You know, it's just absolutely. And these are the things a lot of people don't see, don't even notice. That God works in mysterious underground ways is one way to put it. It's just like this one, piece of literature that's called The Underground Man. It was about a man who was regarded as nobody, literally lived on the streets. But when they had a funeral for this guy, the church was packed. Nobody knew the influence that this man had on other people, simply by being who he was and loving God and neighbor in his own way. Now that is just enough to blow your mind.
And tune in next week for again, Father?
Yeah.
What's the next week we look forward to?
Next week, we will certainly go into each specific voice of God and identify the saint that responded to that voice in their particular saintly way.